not only are you affecting these individuals, but it's also impacting a community with the militarized style of those raids. Today's segment, we're going to be discussing the implications and effects of bail, how it affects bail, your standing with bail, the way, if you can possibly get it. Also, surveillance and effects of immigrant communities, how that affects your immigration status, as well as effects on housing. All of these issues, a lot of folks don't even know it can impact. A lot of folks think that it's on the criminal end, but it's really not. After those segments, we're going to open the floor, have an open discussion with everyone here. While doing so, at any time, if you have any questions or things you want to ask or comments, feel free to use the chat. We're all watching it. My colleagues are watching it as well. Right before we get to right before we start the presentation, I kind of want to just mention a takedown that happened earlier this week. This was something that happened over in Brooklyn, and it was a 77 count indictment. And to be honest, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but I want to point out that when I got wind of that indictment and I started going through it and looking at it, I started looking at the alleged suspects. And the ages is what terrified me the most. I'm talking about out of 19 kids getting locked up, they were all 20, 19, 18, 17, as young as 14. As a father myself, I really had to sit back and think about, how do we touch our youth? How do we impact our community in a way where we can have these conversations at the table, but also doing it empathetically? And what I mean by that is really coming to folks where they are, meeting these kids where they are, because there's something going on that sometimes I feel like I'm missing myself when I hear all these shootings every single day. So I really wanted to hint on that and just let folks know that this is something that we do as a coalition. We really try to keep tabs on everything. So right before we get into our first presenter, we like to engage in our presentations and webinars with folks. I don't ever want to feel like I'm talking at you. I really want this to be a fruitful conversation. So right before we get going, we want to put up a poll, just a quick question. It'll pop up on everyone's screens. And if you could just read it, give it a quick answer, your opinion, that's great. And then we're going to try to roll into the presentation to debunk some of those myths. And, like I said, it's really no right or wrong answer to this. It's just us kind of gauging, where you guys are as far as your knowledge of how the database can impact folks. Okay, I see a lot of yes. So for those who are looking, I'll just read it aloud. Do you think being labeled a gang member impacts your ability to be released on bail? A lot of folks say yes. A few say I'm not sure. I'm not gonna lie, it was at one point I wasn't sure myself until I started getting with some folks and really doing real research and not just hearing the street news most of the time. So with that poll, sorry, give me 1 second.
I'm gonna close it out here at 60 seconds.
Thank you, Jose. Can you pull up the slide for me? Once that's going, Jose. So it seems like we got a highly favor of yes on this question. Do you think being labeled a gang member impacts your ability to be released on bail? So the biggest answer, 86% of us, as you all see, said yes. 5% said no, 9% said not sure. So I would like to bring up my colleague now, Marie Ja, amazing attorney that I work with at Legal Aid. She's also the supervising attorney of our decarceration project, who really had a big hand in helping out New Yorkers and changing the laws around bail and things like that. So I want to introduce Marie Ja. She'll be helping us out on bail. Marie?
Thanks, Victor. Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many of you joined us on a Saturday. This makes me happy. And I hope that you all get some useful information out of this. So to answer this question, the answer is really yes. Being labeled as a gang member does impact people's bail determination. And it's not because there's somewhere in our bail statute that says, you know, if person is alleged to be in a gang, you know, set bail, or anywhere where it even says that, you know, bail, gang affiliation or alleged gang affiliation is something that should be considered. It's just a subjective thing that happens, right? It's about what being in a gang database, the effect that that has on a prosecutor and a judge. And in this case, you know, we kind of have to talk about bail reform in New York and the effect of that too, because pre-bail reform, so pre-January 2020, judges could set bail on anyone who comes before the court. So if you were charged with a misdemeanor, you know, a violation, a felony, it didn't matter. All charges were bail eligible. And so the issue of being alleged to be in a gang was actually even worse then, because you could be charged with a misdemeanor or, you know, a drug case or some other nonviolent crime. And, you know, if the prosecutor gets up and says, we think this person's in a gang, we want, you know, $50,000, they could do that on any case, regardless of the charge. That's a little different now, post January 2020, with the bail reforms, because now every case that comes before the court is not bail eligible. So most misdemeanors and most nonviolent felonies, the first time you come before a court for arraignment, the judge can't set bail. So in New York, we kind of lucked out in that now the gang affiliation label actually has less of an effect on bail, because there are some cases where the judge just cannot set bail when the person first comes before the court. So that's, I think, a good thing. But again, there's nowhere where it says that, you know, this alleged label is something that you should take into consideration. But like many things in our bail statute, it's done by, like, you know, proxy. So for example, New York State does not have a dangerousness consideration in our bail law, right? So that means when a judge is deciding whether to set bail or not, they're not supposed to consider, like, is this person a dangerous individual, or are they likely, am I gonna incarcerate them to stop them from preventing a future crime? They're not supposed to do that, but we know judges do that every day. And we know that there are things in our bail statutes that serve as proxies for that. And those things used to be like the charge and like what the sentence could be, and on that charge. And all these things that for them, they can utilize to say, okay, well, I think this is serious, so I'm going to set bail, that have nothing to do with whether or not this person is going to return to court. And in New York State, the only consideration when setting bail is supposed to be whether this person is a risk of flight, whether if we let this person go without bail, that they won't come back to court. And the way that the gang affiliation label comes into play in our old statute was because one of the bail factors was, you know, the principal's, and this is the person who's arrested, the principal's character, reputation, habits, and mental condition could be considered. All vague terms, all, you know, things where if me as a defense attorney, I get up and I talk about my client's job, their programs that they're in, their family members, where they grew up, what schools they went to. But when the prosecutor gets up, they talk about, okay, well, this person we think is in a gang or gang affiliated. Under the new law, it's not much better. It's another vague term where the court can consider the principal's activities and history. Activities and history could mean anything. So if a prosecutor gets up and says, you know, we think this person's gang affiliated or they're in the gang database, is that considered the principal's activities and history? Who knows? Because that's vague. But it's just, but there's no corroboration also, right? It doesn't say activities and history that you can prove, activities or history that you have some kind of proof or firsthand knowledge of. So they just say it. And the reason, again, that this is important is because it's a subjective thing, right? So, and you don't know what the effect is because you would have to get into the judge's brain, really. But we know that this has an effect, right? Because we know that the number one determining factor of whether a judge sets bail is the prosecutor's request. So if the prosecutors rely on the gang database and they use that as a reason to come in and ask for bail on a case where they would normally not ask for bail, or ask for $50,000 bail in a case where they would normally ask for $3,000 bail, or, ask for remand or whatever else it is. Those are the things we have been able to prove have an effect on the judge, right? So, yeah.
Can I ask you a question really quick, just because I think this also helps, right? Hypothetically speaking, in context of what you just mentioned, if an individual happened to be alleged gang involved, right? Like, let's say there was really no solid evidence, but the local precinct or whoever's charging him, they actually, is it possible that they're sharing information with the district attorney's office saying this person is believed to be a part of? And could that also affect it, even if it's not substantiated?
Right. So these DAs don't have independent knowledge of what people who are getting arrested are doing. This is information that they are getting from the police, right? So whether the district attorney has their own access to the gang database, they probably do, is another thing. But they're definitely getting this information directly from law enforcement that we think that this person is gang affiliated. And that's why they put that on the record. But then they don't have to say anything more, right? It's like, you're standing next to someone and you're like, okay, well, my client's not in a gang. And then that's it. It's literally a he said, she said. But unfortunately, it has the effect that it has is that the person who's the final decision maker is the judge. And they're thinking of, someone violent and, lawlessness. And, if I let this person out, they're going to go and, get into a gang fight, or they're going to go and retaliate against somebody, so it's one of those things that's not really quantifiable, but we know it's happening. And we know it's happening, especially because we know what is quantifiable is that judges, the main determining factor of whether or not they set bail or not is whether the DA asks for it. And if you're in that gang database, chances are the DAs are going to ask for bail or ask for higher bail than they would normally ask for in your case. But again, I would say in New York, we lucked out with the bail reform in that in some cases, whether you come in with the alleged gang affiliation or not, if it's not a bail eligible offense, then they can't ask for bail. The most they can ask for is some kind of supervision. Go ahead.
I have another question for you, and this is actually from an audience member who emailed it to me. They wanted to know, are there any instances or any times where you may have in your practice or any colleagues' practice witness bail being used as a tool of as an investigative tool when trying to hold somebody for information purposes?
Yes, I think that happens twofold. That happens first at the precinct, right? So, once you're arrested and they take someone into a room and they ask them all these questions about like, are you in a gang? Who's in a gang? Where are the drugs? Where are the money? Where are the guns? And then, because we know that the number one thing that bail actually does do is coerce pleas. If we know that when bail is set, it just makes people, sometimes, they want people to cooperate, right? We'll give your client a better deal if they come in and talk to us about alleged gang affiliation. And other times they just know that it's a tool where they're going to be able to get somebody to come in and plead guilty to something that they didn't do with this, alleged gang affiliation happening in the background, and that's going to keep following them, right? So the next time they're arrested, whether it's for jaywalking or an assault, that label is just going to keep coming up, and there's no way to escape it once it sticks.
Thank you, Marie. I have one more question for you. Then I know you still got some things you want to explain, but I think part of the conversation.
I'm fine for taking questions. Yeah.
Perfect. Another question we have from the chat is there any way to challenge a gang allegation if prosecutors allege it when determining bail? And I'm thinking this could be around arraignment time when they're like, hey, we're asking for 5,000, but my client is X, Y, and Z. Is there any way to challenge it right then and there?
The hard part is hard to prove a negative, right? We're saying it's hard to prove he's not in a gang. Like what they should do is come in and prove that he is in a gang, with however way you do that, whether it's, pictures or, you have a picture of him in the street throwing up gang signs or whatever, but we can't prove a negative. All we can say is that he's not in a gang. He's not in a gang, he's in school, he's, you know, these people, and also it's like, sometimes it's like, he's not in a gang, him and his friends like decided to like name themselves the corner of the block they live on. Like, can we please, right? So even the labeling itself is so problematic because they're just taking, you know, a group of friends who hang out together who are like, okay, well now we're gonna be the like 169 boys or whatever. And all of a sudden that's a gang when they're just like a group of people who hang out together, right? So it's hard to prove a negative. And then second, it's like, well, what gang are they in and what does this gang do? And do they have any of the indicia of what you think is a gang, like, you know, selling drugs and, you know, being violent, or are they just a group of people who hang out together?
I have another question for you.
Keep them coming.
So with, sorry, let me see if I'm reading this wrong. So with an allegation, can anybody gang alleged be afforded additional time, because we know it can take sometimes months to have bail application hearings? Can it be reduced later, or will they be subjected to the allegation on both ends? I'm not 100% sure.
I think maybe they're saying is what in sentencing. I mean, look, it has an effect at bail. It has an effect throughout the whole criminal process. And I know I'm here to talk about bail, but it has an effect on what kind of discovery you get, right? Because once there's an allegation of gang involvement, then the DAs are like, we don't want to give you discovery. We're going to redact everything. You know, we can't tell you the names of who said what. We can't tell you where this happened, whatever, because, you know, this is gang involved stuff. It affects what kind of plea offers you're made by prosecutors. It affects, you know, your pretrial detention. And that has a direct effect to whether you do time post-conviction, if you, one, whether they coerce a plea out of you or not. And two, if you're in jail pre-trial, you're just more likely to get jail time post-conviction, right? Yeah. So it's like a thread that just goes throughout the whole system, unless that person can get out, because you're in a much better situation if you are, you know, fighting your case from liberty instead of, you know, from Rikers.
Can I add something to this conversation really quick? Because I think it's really important for me to make sure folks understand, like, when we talk about bail, a lot of these, like, we formed this gangs coalition because of the massive takedowns that's been happening across the city. And we look at the Bronx 120, right? Bail has a way of trying to couple folks together in essence as well. Because now, when these indictments are coming down, they're being investigated for years at a time. And in this process, there's information sharing happening between levels of law enforcement, from the local level, from the precincts, to share information with district attorney's office, and them bringing in, at times, the FBI and other law enforcement entities. So when we look at the bail process, is there a way, like, when these conspiracies are happening, did all 120 people in that Bronx 20 raid get approached with the same bail order? You know what I mean? Like, what changed in that? Was it the history of folks who may have had a pre-existing felony or misdemeanor? Was it the allegation alone that coupled it? Or was there no proof except for some form of field intelligence? You know what I mean? So really putting this in context to the importance of bail in a lot of these young men and women's cases as they even trying to face it.
Right. It's right, also, it's arbitrary, right? So, you know, you could take that 120 people and you're not asking for the same amount of bail on each one of those people. Some people you want remanded because you think that they're the most dangerous, or you think they're the ringleaders, or because they have, you know, prior felony convictions and, you know, have a predicate felony status. And some people who you would normally not ask for bail, you ask for bail because you want to coerce a plea, or you want them to flip and become informants, and you want them to cooperate, and you know you have a better chance of getting them to do that if that person is desperate to get out of jail than not. And then, of course, you know, I don't even know if there were a few lucky people where bail wasn't asked for. I imagine that probably wasn't, you know, the case. But yeah, it's a tool and it's a mechanism to get other things, right? It's not just pretrial detention for the sake of pretrial detention, right? You want somebody incarcerated pretrial because you want them to plead guilty to a crime they didn't commit. you want them to become an informant for the police or a CI. So it's for law enforcement, bail and pretrial detention, especially in this context, is a tool. It's like a means to an end, and that end is to help them in their investigations more so than it is, all the things that you hear all the time about public safety and other things.
Well, thank you, Marie. I really appreciate your expertise in this area, especially on bail. But I do have one kind of question, and just in terms of context, not so much just in bail in general, right? We know that there has been a few attempts as far as bail rollback as it changed from last year's new bail reform laws. Is there any additional rollbacks or things that may happen that you think we should know about? Just thinking about bail in this context standalone.
I mean, unfortunately, we did have a bail rollback, which went into effect July of 2020. And it's sad. It actually, had the effect that it was supposed to have. And it's led to more people being incarcerated pre-trial after we reached, a record low in our jail populations, especially, with bail reform and the COVID releases. We were around the lowest jail population we've had since about World War II. Unfortunately, with the rollback, which went into effect in July, and just the rhetoric, in the city from our mayor and the police and the DAs about, violent crimes and all the gun violence that kind of took place over the summer, judges react to that. And that has an effect because now judges are setting bail on cases where they might not have normally set bail, or setting bail higher, but it's just because of this, fever pitch, like, when you let people out, people are running around, committing crimes rampantly. And it's not true. There's no connection between bail reform and a rising crime, or even the COVID releases and a rising crime. But unfortunately, that narrative really takes hold. And it's led to an increase in jail population during a time where, I think people shouldn't be in jail generally, period, but during a time where it's deadlier because, we're also still in a global pandemic. So yeah, hopefully there are no rollbacks in the future. And actually, given the state of politics in New York, things should be getting better. I'll let people who are more optimistic than I am, believe that and say why that's the case. But yeah, I mean, technically things should be getting better for us and not worse. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marie. I really, really appreciate your time and you coming on to share this information with us. Again, folks, this Marie Ndiaye, she's the supervising attorney for the Decarceration Project at Legal Aid Society, great colleague of mine. I'm not gonna big up too much. I know she hates when I do it, so I'm gonna leave her alone now. So really quick, I definitely want to open up the floor for a few minutes for any feedback, comments. Anyone has any information that you want to add on to this, just for like the next minute or two, not too long. But if anybody has any comments they would like to share, please feel free to do so now before we start moving on to the next segment. Or if there's any questions you're thinking of at the moment, feel free. Joe Smart, while we're waiting to see if anybody has any comments. Oh, sorry, you can raise your hand with the feature, the raise your hand feature. I don't know if they can unmute themselves or not.
Okay, if you have anything to add, if you want to say something, just use the raise hand function and we'll call on you.
And if not, no pressure, but I just fair warning for everybody since we got some time left. I'm kind of a bully back when I was younger. I try to like get that off of me, but I do pick on people in my webinars. I like this to be interactive because like I said, man, we're not here to talk at y'all. I'm formerly incarcerated myself. I'm formerly gang involved myself. I'm blessed to be in a space where I can share this information and give back. So please don't be shy. All my colleagues, everyone who works around this issue, this is not just a job for us. This is something that we know affects and impacts our communities directly. And this is why we do this. So feel free, man, share, but I will pick on people if we have to. But with that said, go ahead, Jose.
Also, if it comes up to you later on, we will be doing the open discussion at the end. So anything that comes up between now and then, we'll also be taking people's comments and questions at the open discussion.
Thank you, Joe. So while in the meantime, just trying to move forward, Josemar, if you want to get the next poll ready for us, so and bring up the slide for me as well. We have a next segment coming up, which is our immigration portion of this, and I have two amazing colleagues who work with us on this issue as well. I'll introduce them in a second. So let's look at this poll really quick. True or false question. In sanctuary cities and states, immigrants who've been labeled as gang members won't be picked up by ICE. True or false? You guys, a couple minutes. Wow, just a minute or so.
We'll take the poll for another 30 seconds and then we'll close it off.
And again, I can't stress enough me appreciating the attendance today. I know it's Saturday, midday, it's kind of cold, but it's pretty nice. So you guys taking the time out to join us is amazing. So kudos to you all.
Right, there's
All right.
a landslide.
I'm happy to hear that, though. I'm happy to see people know, like, ICE is crazy right now. We've been seeing it all over the place. In the courts everywhere, just picking folks up left and right, literally like bandits. One guy told me he's seen a Scooby-Doo van outside. And I was like, what? And they snatched the person up, threw him in the van. So Josemar, give next slide ready for me, please. All right, guys, so we're gonna move on to our immigration portion. Surveillance and effects on immigrant communities. This will be introduced by our colleagues Jane Shim from Immigrant Defense Project, as well as Nathalia Varela from LatinoJustice. So ladies, take it away and enjoy.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the co-panelists. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Nathalia. And so Jane and I are going to be co-presenting, and one of the setup will be that I'm going to actually tell a story about a client, and then we're going to talk about how did we get here, where are people getting caught up in it and how, and also the consequences of it. And so we're going to go through that, and Jane and I will be passing off. And of course, if for some reason we can't get to any of your questions right now, we do have a segment after or later on. There will be open time for question and answer, and you can always email us or reach out to some of the organizers who really are the most amazing. So thank you, everyone. So I guess I'm going to start off by talking about how I ended up getting into this work. I work in New York City as well as on Long Island, and our organization does some national work. So one of the things, so we kind of have a wider scope when we take a look at this, especially when it comes to immigration. So we had a client who was a young boy, and we'll call him BB. And BB actually was in school. He was an unaccompanied minor who was here on an asylum application and was attending school in, previously a predominantly white neighborhood. And eventually we started seeing that from this district, there were a number of students who were getting labels in school as gang affiliated. So for example, if they did something in school, like, drew on a notebook, was wearing a certain sort of clothing, as well as maybe posting something online, they were being labeled as gang affiliated and getting it through the code of conduct in school. So it was like they were gang associated social media, or, gang, I saw one once that said like gang can. I don't know what a gang can is, but that was out there. So he eventually was suspended based on gang affiliated social media because of a posting of sort of a muñequito, like a character draw where where there was like, maybe a pistol in it, but like the normal video games that a teenager plays, and that I see everywhere. And let's be honest, not just teenagers, like, so I see them everywhere. And he had that on his posting, and he also had a flag of El Salvador. And so on one of his websites, it's just somebody who was holding, it was a random girl, in like white tennis keds, holding a Salvadorian flag. And across the middle, it was the number 503. I'm Salvadorian, so I'm familiar with what 503 is, which is the country code to call home, or to call El Salvador. And, you call your family, you have to put in the country code first. And so, there is kind of an uptick that we see a lot of people kind of connect to those like little numbers and stuff. And that's, I guess, what kids do. So the child was the school alleged that somebody complained and said that this person had gang affiliated social media on, but actually it was just those two things. And they were trying to suspend him for like a year based off of that from the schools. So we actually got involved in the case and ended up having to do a federal case, bringing a federal case so that they wouldn't keep the label on him. And the reason that we didn't want them to keep the label on him is because we were noticing that kids that didn't fight at the administrative level in school on their suspension hearing, that were immigrants, were actually eventually getting picked up. And then there was a lot of reports about, once the immigration file was reviewed, inside of the file were surveillance memos or pieces of information from things that were observed in schools, and that those observations, those sorts of labels were being used as reasons for detaining them as gang members, or alleged gang members, I should say, and also for reasons for deportation. There was a lot of reporting around this issue, and it was devastating. It was really, and this was all around sweeps that Department of Homeland Security, ICE, was doing. So there was an operation, especially at the beginning of this administration, that started with Operation Matador, and was doing mass sweeps in neighborhoods where unaccompanied minors were. And there was a high rise in gang labeling. So specifically in this school district, eventually we did get a lot of data about the rise. So from 2013 to 2018, they had 44, I think I'm not 100% on these numbers, but it's 44, I think, suspensions based on gang labeling. And I think 89% of them were done between the school year of 2016 to 2017. To give you an idea of all of a sudden this gang labeling, what happened, and the rate at which it was happening. So, I think that we now are kind of we're taking a look at that to see, as a scope of how we can kind of see how information is coming in and being marked about communities of color. So with that said, we're kind of break that down in different aspects of what all the problems are, which is all of it, right? But kind of breaking it down in a more narrow way. And I'm going to pass it on to Jane so that we can talk about how we got to a point like this.
Yeah, a lot of problems. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to do a 60-second history, a little bit of history about, how we got to this moment kind of politically with immigration. So, one thing to always keep in mind is people didn't always treat immigrants like this. So if you look at even the Republican presidents, Reagan or George Bush, they were not talking about gang members and criminals, in regards to immigration in the same way. In fact, if you look back at public statements, you can hear them saying things like, oh, we should not build a fence, people should be able to freely come back and forth so that they can work and things like that. And so where we really see kind of a big increase in terms of people criminalizing immigrants or talking about how gang members are, gang members from outside the country are such a big threat, that starts happening a lot more under Obama. And obviously, I don't even need to say anything about Donald Trump and the way that he's talking about people who are, coming to America through the southern border. So, I always like to keep in mind that this rhetoric and like kind of the way that it's exploded is like really not, doesn't always have to be this way in terms of how immigration policy is set, but that in the maybe past 10, 20 years, like there's just been this huge increase in like a lot more, you know, cracking down, naming particular gangs to kind of justify like a bigger immigration detention deportation program of like millions of people, right? So I just wanted to like throw in that bit of history just to kind of like place it a little bit. And you know, it comes up also in legislation. So like Congress is always trying to say, oh, we're going to create a program where people can get status and like for dreamers and all of that. There are always trade-offs, and gang membership is like always on the table. So anytime they're trying to offer a pathway for undocumented people to have status, like gang allegations and like that type of thing is always one of the first things that's introduced in terms of like who is not going to get those types of benefits. And so, you know, that it's kind of amazing how this theme of gang allegations, gang membership has become so synonymous with like how they think about what a public safety threat is and like why we need to like detain and deport people. So I just wanted to kind of introduce that a little bit, and then I'll throw it back to Nathalia to talk about kind of where people are getting caught up in this and where the information is getting fed in.
Sure. And so, you know, and with that said, I think that it's important. One of the things is that all the importance of talking about how gangs are talked about and described, that's not going to be just immigration issues. So the rise in discussion about gangs like MS-13 and making it sort of this like foreign concept, that sort of rhetoric affects racial profiling across the board, despite the fact that, you know, someone's a citizen or non-citizen. And so I think with that in mind, we just kind of want to talk about where people are getting caught up. And in some streets, schools, at the border, it's an immediate label. Reporting to the police when they are a victim of crimes, as well as in housing units. And so I think with that said, you know, we do hear reports of in neighborhoods where there are a lot of unaccompanied minors, the police kind of just regularly coming up, harassment, showing up, going all the way to their home, and asking them to provide documentation when they're just kind of around on the street. In schools, we've seen an uptick in labeling on gang labeling. And like I said before, what kind of gang labeling happens? The term gang is obviously very vague. And so when we're seeing that predominantly Latinx students are getting that label, it's alarming, because we do see things like gang can, or, you know, in the case of what I just described before, gang affiliated social media in relationship to video games that somebody plays. And also, you know, having spoken with students who also say that they will be viewed differently if they're Latinx wearing a Chicago Bulls t-shirt or something, and then but other students aren't addressed in the same way. At the border, for example, I think that this, you know, I always kind of, to give an idea, having spoken to an unaccompanied minor who crossed the border, was now DACA eligible, but at the border, a CBP officer, their training on this is unclear. And at the border, he had a scar when he was a young boy from being injured or from having a serious illness, and he needed to have back surgery. And they marked him as having a removal tattoo scar. And so he was labeled as gang affiliated. And fast forward, after growing up in this country and finally having some eligibility for DACA, he was denied because they said that he was gang affiliated based off of that CBP officer labeling him a gang member or a gang affiliate with a removal tattoo when he crossed the border. So, you know, at those points, I think what's really a little bit distinct and what's so alarming about it in the immigrant community is that there's also no right to representation. In New York, you do have right to representation, but if you think about an unaccompanied minor, you know, a young person crossing the border, they're not showing up with attorney in hand and ready to make an asylum application. And they don't, they're not sure exactly what's going on. And so how do you expect a underage person to push off or fight an allegation like that against a CBP officer after the trauma that they just showed up from crossing the border? So that's another thing. And then reporting to the police, there are different stories. This is not just limited to here in New York, but also to other locations as well, where a youth will show up. I know there are cases in Boston. The ACLU did a case maybe 2 years ago. I know there are cases in Chicago where someone speaks to a school administrator, goes to a precinct, scared of violence in the community, or afraid that there might have been a threat made against them, and maybe even alleging that somebody else is gang related or gang involved, and that it might be gang related violence. And they show up looking for assistance or looking for how to best proceed. And that actually mark them as somebody who ends up being gang involved. So, I think the other thing would be, I'm not going to touch upon it too much, but in housing units as well, we see this as an issue, and I think some of our colleagues are going to discuss that afterwards. So I guess the other question is, like, how is this information coming about? And for that point, I did locations, but Jane's going to talk about how some of this information interacts and the breadth and scope of how this information reaches so many different arms of law enforcement and different government agencies.
Really quick, Nathalia and Jane, anyone you guys can answer, but I also got an audience question, an email. It said, at what point did the gang labeling affect immigration so badly? I don't know if that's a timeline question or just a generalized question. I guess I could give a small answer. When this damn president came into office, and then he started putting the war on all this other shit, and then MS-13s came out of nowhere, but that's just a small piece. I'm sure Nathalia may have a better answer than I would.
So, there's different levels, I think, and Jane, I'm going to defer to you in a second. I think there are different levels. In the end, I guess one of the things that's most important to remember is that gang labeling is, from our vantage point, is just another form of racial profiling. And so when it's convenient, there are different reasons that it seems that gang labeling can happen, and it also has a little bit of a benefit. So for example, if a locality is seeking federal funds for getting more militarized or surveillance technology, there are different reasons that things like that have happened throughout history. And criminalizing people of color associating is sort of something that has been happening from a very long time, since the Treaty of Guadalupe. So I think there's a long history of it, but more recently, yes, I would say from the Obama administration as well as the Trump administration, there has been an uptick, and this is a good way to discuss. Well, I'll pass to Jane now.
Yeah, totally everything Nathalia just said, and I would just add that I think in terms of when you first start hearing about these types of gangs, or MS-13, I think under George W. Bush, there was a task force on MS-13. So it's been around in terms of they're actually saying these are our priorities and targets. It's been around since at least then. But in terms of associating somebody as a public safety threat because they have these types of associations, that shit is age old, like Nathalia, mentioned. So but yeah, in terms of what were we talking about? Oh, so there's all these places from where they're collecting information, like a border patrol agent, police on the street, school resource officers in schools. Where does this information literally live? How does ICE get all of this info so that they can actually pinpoint a person to go after? And that's kind of a complicated question, but the short answer is they just have access to so many different forms of data And like all these databases have a lot of overlap. So, you know, in some cases, they have like direct login access to like a local gang database. So, you know, there are certain state gang databases where literally ICE can just like log right in and look through their whole files. In New York, the NYPD has said like they don't give access for the purposes of initiating deportation, but like that there's so many like documented exceptions in terms of who they share information with, who they say they're not, that like there's no way to really know. And obviously it's a total black box in terms of what types of access ICE could get to that information. And that type of information also gets replicated in other types of law enforcement databases. So there are federal databases, one's called GangNet, that just collects a bunch of different kind of like, you know, local law enforcement reports of alleged gang membership or affiliation that, you know, there's no vetting before they enter that information in, and it just ends up in there, and then ICE can find it and use it in however way they want. There's another national database that's called NCIC that has like a gang file portion where, again, like local and state law enforcement can just enter information in there. ICE has access, the FBI uses it. And then another like big part of this is that they use like these big tech firms like Palantir to scrape and collect data from like all over the place. So like it might be some of these law enforcement type database parts. It might be some of these databases, it might be social media, like, you know, the type of technology they've built is for like, you know, wartime, like military stuff, and they can deploy those tools against like local communities and like collect that type of information for ICE. So that, you know, even like the Bronx 120 raid, like you guys may have read that like Palantir was literally on site when that was happening, and that was like a joint task force effort with ICE. So, you know, they have everything at their fingertips in terms of what they can get their hands on, and in terms of what they can actually use against someone. The standards are so low that they can find any scrap of evidence, and there are really no evidentiary standards in immigration court, so they can introduce almost whatever they want. So that's kind of a little bit of background in terms of like where all this information is flying around. And then actually to talk about what the real consequences are for people who are in immigration proceedings, I'll pass it to Nathalia.
So I'm just going to take a quick second to answer a question in the chat about which video games are related to gang affiliation. So, you know, like all gang indicators, I guess it depends on the officer who's viewing it, what color skin you have while you're playing the game, and who's around you. But I will say that I do know of a case where the youth was playing on, I think this is the name of the platform. I am not a gamer. Don't hate me, but I just hate it. But it's something called, I think it was called Rockstar platform, which is a really I think is a really common platform that actually allows for a lot of different sort of avatars and such. And then the other thing I was going to mention quickly is part of the data scrape that happens for immigrant youth. You know, it's not just like it only happens to immigrant youth, but I think because of the evidentiary standards that Jane is raising, it's so problematic. Because Marie earlier talked about, like, you know, if you can prove that you aren't part of a gang at the point of bail, or if you have some way to prove that, you know, that could, like, you know, that has a reduced effect. But actually, just the allegation already carries a lot of weight in immigration court. So that's kind of the difference on the evidentiary proofs. The data scrape that happens is just different for the policing of immigrant persons, because, you know, a locality might be more focused, but with that data connection of like central fusion centers and hubs, that allows for a different level of persecution to an extent because of how flimsy the evidence can be. For consequences, this is very short and sweet. We're talking about detention by Department of Homeland Security, or detention by local law enforcement that feel emboldened during this, specifically during this time, during this administration, to adhere to racist rhetoric. Deportation, applications are affected, people are denied. Specifically, I think the ones that we most commonly see because it's youth are SIJ applications, so special immigrant juvenile applications, asylum, and DACA applications as well. General harassment, just because, you know, what people think a Latinx person looks like, you know, you'll follow, as well as, just like was discussed earlier, just plain association with other people of color or within a neighborhood, depending on whatever predicting policing techniques is used in that jurisdiction or in that locality. And then, like I said, it's really, like I said before, it's really a lot about racial profiling of these persons. And so I think that's my time. And Jane, do you want to say anything else?
Really quick, just let me jump in. Thank you, Nathalia, Jane. Jane, were you saying anything? Sorry, I just cut you off.
No, you're good.
And really quick, folks, you know, immigration is a big part of this conversation as well, because not only is it affecting persons, you know, immigration status, but the way law enforcement goes about it. I know we're in this workshop today, this webinar, but in the other parts of it, we talk about how this happens, you know, the criteria, so to speak, like what can get somebody looked at, right? Just even looking in their direction to even label them to eventually mess up their immigration status. And I want to give you a quick example, really quick, just a question. I don't expect all the answers, but I want to put this in your head. Does anybody know the difference between a jester, and a clown? That's the question. Does anybody know the difference between a jester and a clown? I see a lot of folks laughing, but just think about it. I'm going to give you the answer. So if you look at a jester, for folks who play cards, I'm an average spades player. Anybody want to smoke, let me know. You know what I mean? But a jester is, in the old days, was an entertainer, right? They came with these hats, and it would be like 5 little things that hang off the ends. But what's significant about that hat is it has bells on the ends of them, right? A clown, this is specifically the difference, the bells on the end of their hats. And the clown is just a clown, makeup, crazy hair, whatever. For folks who do know anything about gangs, I follow gangs, I do a lot of work around them. MS-13s, some of their tattoos, most significantly, most notable is the MS, the 13, the crazy face tats all over the body. But also one of those significant tattoos is actually a jester. It's a purpose, it's a meaning behind that in that culture of MS-13 life. And the reason why I'm pointing this out to you guys is because if law enforcement misinterprets a clown tattoo that's not a jester tattoo, unfortunately, someone could actually be labeled for that. And I'm telling you a real story. This is not something I made up. This is a client that we've actually worked with. Unfortunately, this young man was 15 years old. Unfortunately, this young man is still sitting in a detention center today. And he doesn't even speak Spanish. He moved here when he was 3 years old. But he got into some trouble in school, and he has a clown tattoo that was misinterpreted as a jester, and that got him labeled as an MS-13 member during the Trump era. So sorry, I really needed to put that kind of context out there to give folks to understand the severity of immigration. We're not just talking about ICE picking up folks in the courthouse. We're talking about lives being ruined. And one thing, part of this criteria that we haven't mentioned in this particular webinar, is you can be labeled without committing any criminal act. That's completely important, because for every segment we talk about, this criteria falls into each one of those buckets. You can be labeled without committing a criminal act, okay? So any questions in regards to this or any additional comments, please feel free to drop it in the chat. Nathalia, Jane, again, thank you guys so much. Everything, your expertise in immigration definitely outshines mine. But I love working with you, so I definitely, again, I appreciate the presentation. As we're waiting to see if folks have any additional comments or anything, Josemar, can you help me out with the next poll for the next segment? Next, we're going to be talking about housing, but this is a segment that I'm actually looking forward to myself because it's going to be ran a little differently. This is going to be more of an actual conversation between two of our other colleagues. So the poll for this housing side, whose housing status is threatened in the household as a result of a gang-related charge? As a result of a gang-related charge. And you know, while I'm running my mouth, I kind of want to shout out Rachel. She's been putting on a whole cooking show for us this entire webinar, and that guacamole looks amazing. There's another question actually from Rachel. So the question is, in a court of law, can you argue the differences between a jester and clown? Thank you for asking that question. Actually, let me answer it now while we're looking at the poll, because it actually has, I was going to mention it in an earlier topic around bail. So unfortunately, at this current moment today, there is no direct way to challenge the gang allegation once folks are on the NYPD gang database. There's no direct way for us to challenge it. This group is challenging it. We're figuring out ways to fight it, right? But right now, what we want, what we've been able to do is at Legal Aid Society with the Gangs Coalition, we created what we call the For Yourself campaign. For those who don't know, For Yourself is a law in New York State where you can FOIA information from government entities, government agencies. And in this FOIA request, it was empowering New Yorkers to ask NYPD directly, do you have any information on this particular person in regards to me being housed on the gang database? Now, this is not the answer, but what we've been able to do is use the responses of these FOIA requests in some court appearances. We've helped social workers, we've helped other attorneys and colleagues that we work with. And the reason why that response is important and holds a little bit of weight is because we know for a fact that NYPD denies sharing this information with other law enforcement entities, especially the DA's office. We know that's not true, but when they lie about that, and we have paperwork that states that, and they're saying that we don't have any information that we're willing to share with you, we're now kind of throwing a ball in their court saying, well, tell us how you got the information. You get what I'm saying? Tell us how you got it. So that's the way that the FOIA request has been used in the courts. So unfortunately, challenging the actual jester versus clown thing, it's not, because when we hear about gang experts or folks who understand it, in my opinion, the experts are the folks who live that lifestyle. The experts are the folks who day in and day out study those lifestyles. And there's various lifestyles as there's various gangs, right? So who's to say that this person's 110% correct? I know that just because I know some MS-13s and I entrenched myself in the kind of lifestyle understanding it. But it's kind of still he say, she say. So unfortunately, no, there's no way to challenge that particular allegation, but we haven't used it in a FOIA request to have it useful. Sorry, that was a lot of information. Didn't mean to take up too much space there. One more question, and then we're going to move on to the next segment. Has there been success in fighting double jeopardy charges and gang takedowns that reference the same alleged incident, but are then charged as conspiracy too? That's a great question. Josemar, you want to help me with that actually? And I think, is Babe still on? I see MK actually. We have a lot of our colleagues on the phone with us, so I don't know who wants to tackle that question.
Yeah, Babe would be a good person to ask. I don't know if she's still on. She is. I don't know if she's still at the computer, but we'll see.
Here I am. Can you see or hear me?
Can hear you.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay. Not that I'm aware of. The double jeopardy law, the constitutional prohibition on double jeopardy has been held not to apply when it's a different jurisdiction or a different charge. So if they repackage a robbery and make it a RICO charge, it's going to be a different jurisdiction, the federal jurisdiction versus state, and a different charge with additional elements. So under a lot of bad constitutional law, there's no really good challenge this is going to be really important in terms of what is the work we need to do about criminal justice reform and abolition. We need to take double jeopardy back to the brass tacks. You can't try someone twice. Every so often we have liked it when it has happened, like the cops who beat up Rodney King. They went from state prosecutions, right, that were failed because the prosecutors tossed the case. They agreed to try it in an all-white jurisdiction. So then the feds came back around and prosecuted the cops essentially for the same conduct. But more often than not, like most of our criminal laws, it's just targeted against Black and brown folks. So, and we've seen cases where they prosecuted where someone's had a case thrown out in state court, acquitted in state court, tried and convicted, did their time in state court. You know, so it's really a terrible thing. It hasn't been successfully challenged. And under the law right now, there's no really good challenges. We need to make that part of a reform proposal. And ask prosecutors just to swear off re-prosecuting.
Thank you, babe. So really quick, just just on time's sake, we're gonna kind of move on now. Joseph, can you put up that next slide for me, please?
As you're doing
Thank
that,
you, babe. I appreciate.
Hey, can we get Babe?
Marquis.
Yeah, can we just get Babe can we just do a quick introduction, Babe? Everyone needs to know why you're not of the team.
Trying to get back in here. Okay, I'm Babe Howell. I'm a professor at CUNY School of Law. I have been doing research in this area for a very long time. On the earlier bail issues too, I do think lawyers should be asking for a hearing that's more or less the equivalent of a foreman hearing when there's an order of protection that puts you out of the house, where there's bail set and a gang allegation. Let's start saying we want a hearing. We understand the gang database is 99% people of color, that there's no crime necessary to get on it, that there's no ability to get off. We want a full evidentiary hearing, and we'll take that and go for months if we have to. You know, if you're depriving my client of their freedom in part based on this allegation, that's an idea. Like 9 times out of 10, it's going to be shot down by the judge, but sooner or later you'll find a judge who will give you that space, and that would be great for information. But yeah, I'm a professor at CUNY School of Law, and this coalition is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, babe.
Vic, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, I was saying a lot of good stuff too. Now I missed it. No, so our next segment is housing. I'm really excited for this segment, seriously, because I understand it. It affects me. And I think that as you guys hear this presentation and listen to the conversation, you'll also see why every single topic is a large issue. None is smaller, bigger than the other. So in this conversation, we're gonna have Angela Ndiaye. She's an activist and mother of a son in a database and currently incarcerated. Also Marquis Jenkins, organizer with the coalition, amazing colleague of mine, great friend of mine as well. And I'm gonna let them go ahead and kick off the conversation. Like I said, this is gonna be a great thing. And please, we're gonna have an open discussion at the end of this to talk about everything we've all heard, and let's get it going. So Marquis, Angela, you there, you guys can take it away.
Thank you. I'll get us started. First of all, I just want to thank my colleagues for putting on this very important discussion. I want to thank all of the speakers. And most importantly, I want to thank each and every one of you for participating on a Saturday. We're here to engage in great conversation, but more importantly, we have work to do. And I'm excited to get deep and to dive deep into that work with all of you. Today, we're going to be talking about how these gang allegations and convictions actually impact people's housing, their homes, where they live. And we're going to engage that conversation from three different pillars. The first is judgment. What is talking about the judgment that the families sort of have to go through and have to stand up against when a family member is taken down in a gang takedown. The second is the impact on the stability of the family's housing. And then finally, the third pillar that we're going to try to touch on is reentry. What happens when that person is taken away from their entire family, their entire community, serve time, and then needs to go through a rehabilitation process? And the best place to do that, I'm sure you would agree, is home with your family. And so what does that look like for someone who was taken down in a gang allegation? Really, our task today is to bring this conversation literally home. And before I introduce my co-speaker, I just want to ask another question to tag along with the poll, and also to kind of bring you guys in the mindset that we're going to be tapping into during this discussion. And so in the chat box, if you live in subsidized housing, be it public housing, be it Section 8, be it rent stabilized, I want you to put a 1 in the chat box. If you live in private housing, I want you to put a 2 in the chat box. And I'm just gonna monitor that as you guys do that. I'm seeing a lot of 2s. Thank you. I'm seeing a lot of 2s as I suspected. And so let me give you some numbers. This conversation is going to be more about numbers, but I just want you to get an understanding of why we chose to focus specifically on public housing when we talk about the impacts of gang policing. We know that every single New Yorker is impacted in some way, shape, or form by this. But to give you an idea of why we focus on public housing, I want to throw some numbers at you. So public housing, the Public Housing Authority is the largest landlord in New York City, home to 170,000 families, over 323 public housing developments spread out throughout the 5 boroughs, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and the like. One in every 14 residents in New York City is a public housing resident. So when I think about all of the issues, right, not just the gang police and all of the issues that impact people of color, I can't help but think about public housing residents and public housing being ground zero. When we think about the largest gang takedown that took place, it should be no surprise to you that it took place at a public housing development in the Bronx at Eastchester Gardens. And before that, it was Manhattanville in Harlem. But enough about the numbers. Let's bring it home and let's put an actual face on the families that are impacted by this issue. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce my co-panelist, Miss Angela, to talk about her story. And specifically, can you tell us how this gang takedown has impacted you and your family and your relationship with your public housing community?
Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Ndiaye. I am an activist for this entire gang database that NYPD has put together in New York City. My son in 2019 was incarcerated due to an alleged conspiracy to a gang in New York City housing. I live in Lincoln Projects in Manhattan. And he's now serving 4-year sentence upstate New York in the prison system for this alleged criminal act. It is horrifying when I tell you, before my son could even get a trial, pre-trial, or even plead guilty, I was already in court. with New York City Housing. They tried to throw me and the rest of my family out on the street because of something allegedly my son had did. If it wasn't for the Legal Aid Society, I wouldn't still be there. However, in order for me to stay there, I had to sign paperwork saying that my son could no longer come and live or visit me in that project housing ever again, period. Whether he's off of parole or not, he can no longer come there to visit me, per se. And if they find out that he did, I would then be taken back to court and be back facing an eviction again. It's not fair at all. Like, he didn't even see, like, he wasn't even convicted, and they had already judged us and want to punish me and the rest of my family on something that my son might have or might have not done. So I thank the Legal Aid Society for helping me on that note. However, I face another problem now. My son has done 2 years of the 4-year sentence. He'll be home in a year and a half. And I don't have anywhere else for my son to go. He's 22 years old. They had him under surveillance for this quote unquote gang activity since he was 17 years old. And no police officers ever did anything to prevent or to break it up or anything of that nature. So now I have nowhere for him to come home to when he comes out of jail, but to the New York City shelter system. And that's crazy. Now, because of the COVID, I can't afford even to move to put him somewhere else, to go live somewhere else. I can't afford it. There's no way I can afford $2,300 rent for a 2-bedroom somewhere else in Manhattan. I'm aware of housing having a re-entry program. I'm not too sure on how it works, but my son doesn't even want to come back to the neighborhood because he's scared of being profiled, because he's in this database. The undercover cops know who he is. The uniformed officers know who he is. So he's afraid, and any police contact is a violation of parole. So he doesn't even want to come back to the neighborhood and partake in this reentry program. New York City Housing doesn't do anything for families like us. I wish they would move us or move my family to a different housing development somewhere else so my son could start over, in a different neighborhood and have a clean slate where police officers don't know who he is. Other gang members, alleged gang members know who he is, and he can have a fresh start. They don't do enough. They don't do enough as far as job facilitation or anything of that nature. So I don't even know where my son is going to be in a year and a half. Like, I have no clue. So on that note, I'll give it back to Marquis.
Thank you. I mean, we're talking about a baby. We're talking about a 22-year-old. Now, the way I relate is I'm also a product of public housing, and my mom and dad raised 10 children in public housing. And I can only imagine them having to choose between kicking me out for something stupid I may have done or may have not done, and protecting that home for the rest of my siblings. Did you have to come to any similar situation in sort of figuring out how you're going to protect your entire family?
When he first got arrested and we bailed him out, which cost me $100,000 cash. I had him stay with a brother out in Long Island. And, but my brother, he couldn't stay there because my brother was in the studio. So, it made no sense. Like, I don't even know, Marquis, where our family is gonna go. What are we supposed to do before he comes home? I don't know. I don't know.
The other piece that really struck out for me, and I see some chatter in the chat box, and also quite honestly related to how it's impacted in the immigrant or quote unquote undocumented community, where is that you don't have to be found guilty. They simply have to charge you with the crime, and because the housing authority has a lower standard, they can immediately move forward with an eviction process. At what point did they start the eviction process for you and your family, or did they?
Oh, they started the eviction process right away, right after his arraignment. I got the paperwork immediately after the arraignment. I want to say maybe a couple of weeks. So they didn't even wait long because he was on my lease. It was flagged automatically.
Mm-hmm. So some of y'all could say, well, you know, maybe NYCHA is not so bad. After all, they just redid their permanent exclusion policy, right? NYCHA has a program to which they allow returning citizens to come back home and live with their family. Some of the facts about this program. So one, the family has to apply to allow that child to come back. And there's certain criteria that individual has to meet in order to be able to return back. So the first thing that struck out is you said initially you attempted to move your son with your brother, and he stood there for quite some time. But the policy actually says that you've had to be out of prison for about 3 years. So let's assume, for scenario purposes, that your son stayed with your brother for about 4 years. Right, he stayed with your brother. Then finally, you realize, you know, he's developed, he's strong enough. Now he can come back home. Well, according to the reentry policy, he wouldn't be able to apply to come back home because he would have had to do that process within 3 years of him returning home. The second fact about this policy is that even after you apply, this gentleman, your son, would have to go through a 6 to 12 month intensive program with a number of different stakeholders. And I can't tell you exactly what that program entails. Certainly they say that they're going to be providing all different types of services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the proof is in the pudding, right, in terms of how those services actually play out. So now you got to make sure he applies within those 3 years. Then you have to go through a 6 to 12 month program, and then and only then could you ask if this individual can be put on the lease. So let's talk a little bit about that process and how it makes you feel, and then let's connect it to the reality that they kicked them off the lease to begin with. So you kick them off the lease, and now you want to be this hero and come up with a program that says he can come back. Why not take him off the lease? Why take him off the lease to begin with, as opposed to just coming up with a reentry program? What are your thoughts on that?
Where am I supposed to put my son in that process? Where is he supposed to live? Like, are you kidding me? Like, you cannot honestly be telling me that I have to ask a family member to house my son. He's not nobody else's responsibility. He is my responsibility. He is my son. So if no family member will take him, then he has to go into the New York City shelter system at 24 years old, go into the New York City shelter system. My father passed away on parole in the New York City shelter system and used to cry to me how that is so much similar to prison. So I absolutely not. That program is bogus. It's a bogus program to say that they're helping the Black and the brown, and they're really not. I promise you that. That's ridiculous.
So let's, we can complain and we can talk about the problems all day, right? But let's dig a little bit deeper into this re-entry process. What are some of the things you would change in this policy, or would you throw the whole damn thing out and come up with a whole new policy? And what would be in that policy?
I would throw the whole program out. It doesn't even make sense. Like, there's no, like, half of the population don't have family that doesn't live outside of New York City housing. That's number one, okay? I'm fortunate that I do, okay? But I cannot put that burden on anybody else. Like, that's not nobody else's responsibility. That is my son's responsibility. That's my responsibility as his mother. So I would like New York City Housing to come up with a program where they give me the option to relocate. I wouldn't mind moving, you understand, to a different borough, so that my son, he has a fresh start. He doesn't have to get profiled by the same officers that locked him up at the beginning, to begin with. You understand? Give him some type of job training. You understand? Mandate to him to some type of job training. So, you know, while the process is going on, but at the beginning say, okay, listen, we're gonna put you on the lease, but contingent of you being put on the lease, you gotta go to these job placement programs. No problem. Do something of that nature. But to say he's gotta be somewhere else until he completes the process and then can get put on the lease, like, that's ridiculous.
Let me make a little correction. So he would be allowed for those 6 to 12 months. He would be allowed to live in the apartment. He would have to ask again, right? First, you have to meet the criteria that the housing authority set out for you. Once you meet that criteria, then they will allow you temporarily in the house for 6 to 12 months as you go through this program. But what is key, and I think that, and tied to the statement that you said, is that there is still never a guarantee that they would allow your son to be back on the lease. So even after he goes through the 6 to 12 month program and you would work with him to make sure that he's successful, there's still a chance that they won't accept him on that lease. And so what do you do in that event? You've
Move.
invested.
I would have to move. Like,
Right.
I would have no choice, you know, but we're in the pandemic. We're still here in the pandemic. The business that I'm in has changed dramatically. I can't afford to move nowhere else right now. So then where does my son go?
Right. As I mentioned, 1 in every 14 resident in New York City is a public housing resident. There's alternative facts and then there's likely facts. I would say, right, likely that the vast majority of the 12% of African Americans who live in New York City, I would say maybe 9-10% of those individuals live in public housing. I can't confirm that, so I'm gonna call them some likely facts. But I want to pull on, as we are closing, I want to pull on some empathetic strings. You know, I asked a question earlier to our participants, what type of housing they live in. And so, yes, we can talk about the fact that the impact that it has on your direct family. But some of us seen the videos, some of us read the articles about the way in which these takedowns occurred. And so I asked my participants to think about where you live and then think about the way in which these gang takedowns took place at 5 o'clock in the morning, in some cases earlier. And if you will, Miss Angela, could you kind of give us a little bit of sort of what that looked like for you?
There was 10 officers at my door, February 2nd, the day before my 40th birthday. And they pulled my son out of my apartment at 5 o'clock in the morning. I promise y'all that. And that was horrible. Horrible to come in to search my house at 5 o'clock in the morning, to look for weapons, to look for clothing that might have matched some pictures that he was allegedly in. That was ridiculous. At 5 o'clock in the morning. At 5 o'clock in the morning, when the search warrant said they were only allowed to enter at 6 o'clock in the morning. Paid lawyer.
And so not just you, right? Like, as traumatic as that was, your next door neighbors felt your pain. Your down the hall neighbor felt your pain. This rocked the entire neighborhood. Helicopters, tanks coming all up in the neighborhood as if this was a military operation.
Absolutely.
And so let's end on a good note. Let's talk more about solutions. When we talk about how these takedowns are taking place in the public housing community, what advice do you give to our participants? Do you give to our legislators? And do you give to these freedom fighters that organize this event to make sure that we're moving in the right direction?
Just keep fighting for us. I thank everybody that is a part of this, even the ones that are not on here. I thank y'all from the bottom of my heart. I really, really do. Because if it wasn't for people like you guys and myself, I don't know where a lot of parents would be, a lot of families would be. There's a lot of families that are still out here that don't have no clue. And I feel bad for them. I really, really do. But thank y'all for, keep going, keep striving, reach as many people as you can. You're angels in my eyes.
And thank you so much for standing up today. We know it's not easy. We know you are still in this battle, both on the social justice front, but also on a personal front. And this fight cannot go on without the brave and courageous impacted people like you who are willing to take the risk, stand up, show your voice and your face, and say, if you join me, I will keep fighting. So thank you so much for being here today and being a part of this movement and inspiring us all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed day.
With that, I mean, damn. Damn. I'm not laughing, I'm smiling just because, I remember calling Angela and asking her to share her story with us today. You know what I mean? And I want you to know, Angela, you being here today, I don't know if you was looking at the chat box while you were presenting, but there's folks here who believe they can help you. And I told you this before, we're not the gatekeepers to this work. We're not. We're just folks who care enough to say we got to do something about it. And if I can't do it, Marquis can do it. If Marquis can't do it, Jermaine can do it. If Jermaine, you know what I mean? And the building, the networking around this is what shows a united front, is what gets us in position to fight these battles. So I don't even want to let go and say, for the folks who joined us today, you guys are in this fight with us too, because just you sharing this information or even mentioning it to somebody later is enough. To putting the bug in the air that this is happening is enough. So again, Angela, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, because we're advocates. Like you said, a lot of us are impacted, but we're advocates. People expect us to do this, but sometimes they miss what the harm is really doing. And I wrote in the chat, this is displacement at its best. This is literally displacement. They're telling you you have to put a 22-year-old kid in the shelter when his mother is ready, willing, and able. She is his mother. It's not the state's responsibility. She said that. You feel me? And I also want to shout out Ms. Murray on the line too. She's also part of the coalition. She's an impacted mother. Unfortunately, her son is dealing with some things as well. And to see these women standing up and fighting day in and day out, bugging us in text messages and day in and day out, and them not stopping. Like, this is why we do this, is to make sure that folks are really getting the resources and understand that there is a network out here that they can be a part of as well. Miles, I see you on the call too. So with that being said, I don't know if folks have any questions that you all want to ask in regards to this, but while you're thinking, sorry.
I see Keith raising his hand. Keith.
All right, I just want to say one more thing and I'm gonna come back. I just want to make sure I'm pointing these out. The reason why we did this part 2 now with only 3 segments, because we got a part 3 coming again, because all of this, the way this database affects folks is so intricate and there's so many ways that we have to do these series this way to make sure you're getting the right information. But Angela in her story pointed out so many of it, so many systematic issues that she has to face. And I don't want to take it too much more time, but Angela, we met after the takedown of her son, and NYPD, they sent out an email saying they're doing a community debriefing, that they want to sit down with the community and tell the community what just happened the other night. Do you know these people sat in that room and told these parents, we took down the worst of the worst in your neighborhood. You're safe now. I promise you, Angela's still on the call. I didn't know her. I'm sitting in the room with my boss doing my job, and I'm looking around the room, and I just seen a community member face screwed up, and I said, nah, Something's wrong there. That bothered her. And I promise you, right after I ran outside, it was Angela, turn your camera off for a second for me, please, 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 please. I'm laughing now because I'm thinking back of this whole of 2020 as a whole, everything we all just went through, right? All I did was stop to say hi to her. That was it. She ran out of that building. I didn't know she was but I knew something was wrong. So what I'm trying to point out to everybody on this call is we have to talk to each other. We have to check in with our community members. I could have missed, not an opportunity, but I could have missed helping this woman and her family had I just did my job and went home. I called her and it was cold as shit, dark as hell outside. I said, excuse me, miss. I don't know if y'all know, folks who do know me, I'm 6'2", 200 pounds.
And I'm only 5'7", okay?
But all I'm saying is, we talked that day. I said, hey, I just wanted to ask you why you were here because it didn't look like you were happy with what was being said. She said, no, because they talk about my fucking baby. Excuse my language, y'all. I apologize. And from that day, I said, nah, we're going to figure it out. And it went from just giving her information on her son to right after the permanent exclusion issue. And then I called about this. Now, it's a lot. So what I'm telling y'all, collateral consequences go further than we think. But it's on us as community members, as coalition members, as everybody coming together and finding an approach to the solution together. Anyway, don't want to take up a lot of that time, but I really need to put that in context because Angela's story alone pointed out so many flaws for so many systems where it's not just going to be us that have to go against that. It's everybody. But thank you again, Angela. I can't thank you enough. I'm being honest. I really can't. So with that, again, open discussion time. We're here to have a conversation now. Anybody, feel free, comment on something, ask a question, tell us if you want to tap in. Oh, Angela, too, like I said, in the chat, there's some folks that would like to connect with you in relation to your son's reentry. So hopefully you can connect with those folks. Folks in the chat, I've taken your numbers down who said that you wanted to connect with her. I will help you out. But Angela, if you see the numbers yourself, feel free. You know what I mean? This is what networking is. They may be.
I took them down.
All right.
Keith, I saw your.
Oh yeah, Keith, my bad, bro.
Yeah, I saw your chat box. Please share if you got some more on NYCHA's exclusion, or permanent exclusion policy.
No, I don't. I just wanted to make sure that Angela got that information concerning Carmen. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. I'm good.
Did you want to say something different? Because I know you had your hand up. Was that all?
No, well, just know that I'm going through the same thing on the federal level, right? So I just did 16, and you know my family is on Section 8, and I know somebody else in the NYCHA, and they won't let me in. But I'm confused because I was told that if you didn't commit certain crime, like if you didn't commit a crime on the property itself, that you were still allowed. Is that true, or is that not the case?
There are certain crimes that will always make you permanently excluded, i.e. rape, if you were involved with making methamphetamine in public housing, and there might be one or two others, but those are the two main charges or convictions, if you will, that will permanently ban you forever from NYCHA. But as you mentioned, right, you have to be selected by this group that is largely influenced by the NYPD. There are some notable organizations that are involved, like the Vera Institute, but it is a process that I think that Angela and I were trying to raise should not be, right? If you have someone and you're even going to go as far as allow them to come back, then why not start that reentry process immediately when there is a charge and not force a mother to have to choose between kicking out that one child to save the other family or trying to figure out how they can move, which many public housing residents do not have that second option. Right, so if we know, and here's some more likely facts, right? The database, the last time I checked, the game database there was 117,000, or maybe it's just 17,000, so forgive me, I'm conflating the numbers, but there was some 17,000 individuals in that gang database, and 99% of them were people of color. Not 91, not 92, not 65, but 99% of the individuals were people of color. And again, if you think about the public housing population, the vast majority of those individuals are coming from public housing. And so if you think about that, and if NYCHA really wants to be the leader that they need to be, then they would have never put that exclusionary process in place to begin with, and instead enforce all of the policies and the recommendations that Ms. Angela mentioned.
Just for clarification, you said rapists and in another category. My son doesn't fall in any of those. Okay,
Right.
Right. He doesn't fall in any of that kind. Those were never any of the charges in the indictment that took down 19 boys. Okay, so that's not the case, and the crimes were not committed on NYCHA property. So for them to hold that against my son is ridiculous.
Right. Absolutely.
Let me say this too, right? This is something, and I'm kind of throwing an alley-oop out there without being direct, right? Angela mentioned a story that during her son's, it wasn't even an investigation. They were just surveillance process. It was over years. It was over years. It was a period of years. He was 17, 16, 17 when they started looking at him, right? Or keeping tabs on him. And part of this process, when we talk about the system, is why wasn't the mother notified? They knew where he lived, apparently, right? They knew where he stayed. You're surveilling babies, you're surveilling kids. And we've seen this not only in Ms. Angela's case, but in other cases as well, and some of the takedowns as well. These, especially when it comes to teenagers, these investigations are taking years. And once they're 19, 20, is when they come and swoop them all up. That's a big deal. This gangs coalition of a testimony, a hearing with the city council a few years back, and a council member cried on the stand saying, "You're waiting for our kids to become adults, and you're already labeling them."
Sorry.
So I want to point out, right, that we never know who's in the room with us. We never know who's in the space with us. You know what I mean? And I want to shout some folks out for taking the time on a Saturday as well. I'm not going to shout them out individually. It's up to them if they want to say who they are. But we have some Manhattan DA candidates joining us today, listening in. And, Angela, just knowing a lot of these raids that took place in Manhattan, I think it's imperative for these folks that may be in these positions at some point, hear these stories from community members directly. So I appreciate you all being on the call as well and hearing the folks out, because sometimes creating the space to have the conversation is enough. You know what I mean? To let somebody hear that story. Sometimes we don't know, if we don't open our mouth and say hello to somebody, what position they'll be in later on in life. We don't know. So again, that's just my alley-oop out there. People can do what they may with it. But at the same time, I appreciate the diverseness in this. Well, yes, they want to make a comment. So Tahini Abushi, please make a comment. Thank you for joining us. Can you unmute yourself? Can you? Oh, there you go. Oh.
You guys have to mute me. Don't touch it. I unmuted myself now. Okay. So I love these get-togethers. I was at the first round. I thought this one was just so important. And for those who don't know me, my name is Tahini Abushi. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I defend against everything that we talked about: excessive force, discrimination, racism, and one of my dearest things to my heart is representing children in suspension hearings. Because I feel like that is where the criminal justice starts early for our communities of color. And for me, this is personal, because when I was 14, my father was sentenced to 22 years in prison. And overnight, my mother became a single parent of 10 kids. So I firmly believe that those who are impacted by these policies, those who are targeted by these policies, should be at the helm of the conversation and the transformation. Because there are people that have been in these offices for a very long time, and could have changed things and could have done something different, but they didn't. And it's because we're still seen as the other. It's still acceptable to destroy and marginalize communities of color. And we can see that with what happened in DC, right? With the restraint and the control and the understanding and the comments coming out of what we witnessed. And so I just want to give a big shout out to all of you guys, Joe Smart, Professor Babe, Victor, and all of you who are experiencing this firsthand, that you are more than whatever these labels and circumstances they try to drive us under and hold us back with. And that not only can we overcome, but like myself, to come from the background I did to now be running for Manhattan District Attorney, it's like unheard of, especially here in New York. So I just wanted to put that out there and tell you that, you know, I'm proud of you. For the moms out there and the parents out there, there are days I can barely keep up with myself. I don't know how you do it with kids. I don't know how my mom did it with 9 kids and a husband in jail. But we have to keep going even when we're tired, and we have to be unequivocal about the demands that we're making, and make sure that in all of these upcoming races about the city, it's about the status and the protection and the uplifting of communities of color from here on out as the center of the conversation.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you for that. And you know, I'm actually happy you asked to make a comment, because again, I think folks need to know, like, these topics and these issues, it's not up to us, right? But we put this together because we have to make folks aware that it's happening. We have to make folks aware that it's happening. So that was kind of just a representation of, again, we never know who's around. We never know who's in the room. We never know if someone can throw down and say, hey, I can help. All right. Anybody else want to make any comments? Anybody? Any of our other colleagues? Okay, well, I'm saying I might start picking on people because there's somebody on here that I want to pick on, and I'm trying to give them their space. Okay, yeah. See, you ain't raised your hand yet, so I'm gonna just call on you, and you're gonna be mad at me. All right, fuck it. Kia, you there? I need you to unmute your mic, man. Come on board. You played yourself now. Kia, don't make me text your phone. I need you. I'm trying to get a friend of mine and a good colleagues of mine.
Victor.
There she goes. What's up?
I'm sorry, Victor. First of all, I'm mad at you. And I would unmute my camera, but y'all don't want to see what's behind this. I was ordering me some food. Victor, I was thinking he better not be talking about me.
So, no, seriously, Kia, I appreciate you being here with us today. And I want the folks to know who you are, because again, you know, what you've been able to do in my life personally and the work that you do is amazing. And the way we've collaborated, I think it started with a conversation, the same thing we're speaking about, you know? Kia, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, I do, Victor.
Okay.
No, I'm joking. My name's Kia Gregory. I'm a journalist. Been a journalist for about 17 years. And what else do you want me to say, Victor?
That's it. You know, we had that conversation about me not knowing if you're a journalist, a reporter, whatever. So you said journalist. That's enough for me. So yes, Kia is a journalist. You know, we met a few years back. You want to say something, Marquis?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to shout out Kia, because that whole response to Victor was just memorable. And so I'm a fan now just because of that.
I'm sorry, y'all. Listen, anybody who knows me, I'm a clown, man. I try to smile as much as I can. But especially when we're having these types of conversations, you know what I mean? When Angela was speaking, I started feeling like that pit in my chest where I was losing breath, because I feel not bad for her, because she's a warrior. She's not a victim anymore. You know what I mean? She's taking this matter in her own hand. Angela's a warrior. But I talked about Kia now because when it comes to journalism, the work that we do is so damn important. The messaging that comes out, it's so damn important. This NYPD database has housed over 40,000 Black and brown people of color on it. Why is it just now that there's a coalition formed? You get what I'm saying? These takedowns has been happening in our city for years now. Why is it just now that electeds care about it or folks care? I'm not saying just now. Let me take that back. Sorry. Because I know some colleagues and folks who've been doing this for years now. Babe, shout out to you. I'm not saying we just started.
Victor, may I?
Go ahead, bro.
No, I just, because you got me inspired, and I think the key thing here, right, is, you know, when you know better, you do better, right? And so I guess an open question that we can pose to our participants is, now that you know this information, what do you think you can do? Like, what is one step that you can take towards addressing this issue, getting rid of this gang database, and stopping the unwarranted surveillance of our young people?
Can I add to that now that I don't like talking without looking people in the eye. But I just wanted to say real quick, since Victor was gracious enough to invite me, you know, real quick, everything you all are talking about is what drew me to journalism. I used to be an accountant, and I grew up in a community in Philly, in public housing, that always got painted one way in the media. A bad place where those people live. Always just, we only made headlines when a crime happened. And fine, but never celebrated people in the community, like my mother, like my father, like the people who painted the curb white and made flower pots out of old tires. And even when they did talk about crime, they never talked about it within the system of why is this happening and all the failure system breakdowns that the systemic racism involved in everything, the housing, all of it. And so that's what I like to do. I go below the headlines. When news breaks, I run the other way. I could care less that some awful thing happened yesterday. It's like celebrating the good stuff, but also when you talk about something, look at it in the way of systems. And I met Victor at a rally for his brother, and he was probably like the last one to speak. And he just said something, and I'll let him share if he wants. I'll never forget it. And it just resonated with me. And I purposely wanted to talk to him because the same voices were getting told in some of these stories. And I already knew I wanted to talk to the brother of Delron Small, because it was a name I was seeing, and I was like, I wonder what he thinks, how he feels. I want to hear his voice. And I had a chance to do that. And so now Victor and I are working together on some other things, but I just wanted to offer that. And you know, those are the types of stories I like to tell. I write for magazines mostly now, and I'm working on a larger project. So I just wanted to offer that once I got myself together and I can look y'all in the face. Thanks, Victor.
Nah, no problem, you know, but I say that because Angela's story is a story to tell for the people as well. You know, I think it takes courage for folks. Like, I don't know, I'm Black, I'm African American, y'all go and see that. I grew up in the time of what goes on in my house stays in my house. That's how I grew up, you know what I mean? And I grew up with this notion that nobody's gonna care if I don't care. I grew up with a notion that I have to make it better for myself, you get what I'm saying? But I realized as I started getting older that I can't do it by myself, I can't. And same thing with these systematic issues. These systematic issues can't be attacked only with the impact of people, but it can't be attacked only with the folks in power to change it. Every time there's a bill introduced, every time there's something that's happening here, and yes, we have somebody that wants to champion the bill, and then they want to say, but what about the people it's hurting? Where are they at? I want to hear from them. You get what I'm saying? They want to hear from the impacted people, not the advocates. We're the conduit to get those voices of the impacted heard. All the research that we do, and again, I'll say and say, a lot of us, my colleagues, a lot of us on this call that put this together, we are directly affected. We are directly affected. But while fighting for our own retribution in this, we realize that it can help other community members that we're already working with. And that's what we try to admit when we do these workshops, is connecting, networking, you know, finding resources and holding on to those resources. And I want folks to know that, you know, the Gangs Coalition, we also have a newly built website. I hate feeling like I'm always selling something to somebody. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to lay out those
Big, we're
resources.
gonna go over the website a little bit later. So let's maybe take
Oh,
one or two more.
I want to shut up.
Yeah,
I'm
let's
good.
take some more.
I thank you.
Any others?
ahead,
I want to
Marquis,
know.
take it
Come
away.
on. No, we got some soldiers, and pardon the pun, but we got some incredible advocates on the call. I want to hear some solutions. Like, what can you do? What should we be doing? Now we can pick on some people. Jordan, I'm going for you first. Jordan, what are your thoughts? How should we be fighting, or how can we step up the fight?
You're on mute, Jay.
Hold on, let me turn this down a little bit. I guess just to continue to like build numbers and be consistent. I don't know too much about like the legal system and whatnot, but I do know to get anything moving, you need like a movement, and to see that people actually care. I heard I speak on caring, and if people don't come out to show that they care about a situation or these type of matters, then they're gonna get swept under the rug. So I guess it's to continue to galvanize people and connect with the people on the ground level. I think that's the only way, we'll build a consistent fight.
Thank you. I'm gonna pick on someone else. Tyshawn with the cool background. Did I pronounce your name right? Forgive me.
Yeah, I agree. Like we said, I'm impacted by this, and I have my mom listening to this as well, because I'm in NYCHA right now. I was convicted of a crime the same way, like they speak of that. I'm 47 years old. So the impact of it, like you said, you got to let your voice be heard and let people know. I go downstairs in the management office and I let them see my face, even though I live with that. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not scared of it. You know what I mean? So I like to tell people, like, you got to walk your own door. Like he said, you got to do it for yourself, but you also have to connect the dots and see who's there to fight for you in your corner. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, my mother's sitting right next to me. A lot of things I didn't do is because of her. If her heart can take certain things, you know what I mean? My fearlessness could be detriment to her. And sometimes I have to scale that back so it doesn't hurt her. Because I know a lady that was kicked out of NYCHA, and I see her every day at Dollar Tree begging for dollars. And I'll be like, damn, that could be my mother. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I just like to say, we all impacted by this thing. And sometimes we don't realize how the belly of the beast can affect us, man. And that's why we're on these calls.
That's right. And just because you on the move, and I'm going to put you on the spot, my brother Danny, I'm putting you on the spot. What can we do? What can you do to help move this along? Last one. You got the last one, Danny. You got to go on mute. We can't hear you.
I'm mute. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got it. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
My thing is morally based. My thing is based on, networking and everybody sticking together. The backbone of it. The people who's really out here putting in the work and let the community as well. You know what I mean? That's what I'm into. You know what I mean? I'm out here really putting it in with the people. I got very good people around me, very good influences. And I'm just looking forward to hearing from other people in the groups too, because I'm always looking for information to, basically put out there and give to the community that we live in, because we really be out here in these neighborhoods. We be like out here. You know what I mean? Like, True to Life is really out here. We putting in the work, like, for real. So if there's anything that I could do within my team, please reach out and let me know. Like, I'm all for that. I'm on deck whenever needed. Please reach out to me. True to Life, here we go.
That's what's up, man. Respect, right? I don't know if we have time for any more. We're going to close out, Joe Small. I was going to kick it off to the mothers, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, if anyone else wants to add anything in, Miss Murray, I don't know if she's still on the call. Miles, Rose, I know you guys were also on the call. If you guys want to say anything before we close out, we would love to hear from you. If not, that's fine as well. Hey, Miles. Oh, sorry, one more time. Sorry, I clicked it. Go ahead now.
Unmute now. We good?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a quick, my anecdote of the morning. I got a call this morning we did from my Aunt Marion. I had told her about this, about the coalition, and she called this morning and she said, Miles, there's hope, you know, and apparently she's in a book club and they were reading Kamala Harris's book, you know. And okay, it's Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and you know, it's not the kind of who knows what that push will be from there. But she said in the book she saw that they were doing that thing that I had described to her of labeling kids gang members and then rounding them up, I think is what she said. You know, and I was so moved by that and struck by her understanding what we had talked about weeks ago. And you know, and she's 95 years old. She's you know, if I caricature her, I mean, it's unfair, but you know, she's a little old white lady who lives in the suburbs of New Jersey. But it was an example to me that you know, that we've got to keep talking. Just these conversations, the word gets out and the circle widens, and I think she's right. There's hope. There's hope in this networking, in this, you know, and you never know what's gonna hit somebody and lead to more conversation and voters and just people understanding what this is about. So so it's hopeful to me. That's my story of the day.
Thank you, Miles.
Thank you, guys.
Ms. Murray, you want to say anything?
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you, as always, you know, for your taking time out to put these kind of webinars and the work that you're doing, because I would be so lost without y'all. So I'm very appreciative. Of course, my son is, as always, and it seems like every time there's always a challenge, you know, you'll come through. Josmar, you know, I hit you up like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock this morning. You know, I was dealing with another situation. You know, it kind of got me down a bit, you know, for a moment, but, you know, my family, we're warriors. And I feel that, you know, this is a sacrifice that we have to stay focused and true to fight, because it's not just my family hurting from this, it's so many families hurting. And I'm thankful and blessed that, you know, the support that I have, that I'm able to be a part of this, you know, and I just said, no, just keep, you know, just to staying focused. There's so much more work we have to do, but it's important that we get to the folks with this new administration to make our voices and the work that y'all been putting into this to support us families to be heard, you know, and be a part of this change. Because if we don't get to that table, okay, it's just like all that we're doing is not going to go nowhere, because a lot of people just don't care. They don't care. You know, some people out here with their own agendas, you know, they come through and then they're gone. But one thing I could say about you guys, I know in your hearts, you're in this, you know, to help us families. So we're grateful. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Miles and Rose. I know Angela jumped off, but for any parent, any loved one of anybody who's, you know, fighting for someone who's behind bars, and also for the people who are behind bars, you know, fighting, you know, from inside. I mean, we do this all for you guys. So first of all, thank you guys all, because you guys inspire us and continue to move us forward. I also just want to thank all of our panelists today. Marie from Legal Aid, Jane and Nathalia for talking about the immigration impacts, and Angela and Marquis for really giving us a lot of information about the housing impacts. And a big shout out to Victor for facilitating us throughout the whole thing. Really appreciate his great moderation and really help bringing this conversation together to make it a community conversation. Thanks for debate for jumping on. Thanks to all of our colleagues for jumping on. Thanks to all of you guys for joining us, taking some time out on a Saturday. It's usually not an easy day to get people, but thank you all for sharing this time with us. And we will, when we actually go through the closing steps, we will be doing another webinar as part of this continuing series. So we're continuing to have these conversations. So we'll keep you guys informed. And also, if you know someone, tell a friend to tell a friend, and keep the circle growing. As Miles was, as someone else earlier was saying, just keep the circle growing, keep the conversation growing larger and larger until these voices can no longer be ignored. So let me just pull up my screen while I'll just close this out. A couple of next steps. Stay in touch with us. If you want to be added to our email list, you can leave your email in the chat box. You can also follow us on Twitter. You can also check out our website and join our mailing list there at gangscoalition.org. Just keep giving us your information and we'll keep you abreast of upcoming events. As I said, we're going to have another event soon. Tweet or post your stories and comments from today using hashtag erase the database NYC. Anything you want to add to the conversation comes up, please keep the virtual conversation going. Tell your local officials that gang databases need to go. At the last event, we talked about the Manhattan DA's race, but also talked to local officials, assembly members, city council members, state senators, Congress members, make sure that they understand that the gang databases are hurtful to communities, not helpful. Also, you can contact the Inspector General's office and tell them they need to investigate NYPD gang policing tactics. Their contact information is there. We are continuing to call for a full audit of what is happening with the NYPD's gang policing tactics, because so much of it is happening behind closed doors and secretive and without any transparency. And we know that some of the things that are happening, the NYPD doesn't want that information to come out. So it would be helpful for us if we got better transparency on those issues. And stay tuned for our next webinar. It will be tentatively titled Social Media and the Criminalization of Youth. It will talk about how social media is now being used as a big tool for police and prosecutors to build conspiracy cases and to basically draw guilty by association connections between predominantly young men and women of color in public housing and nearby communities. So those details will be announced soon. Thank you guys for joining. Again, appreciate all of our colleagues today, Jermaine, everybody who helped behind the scenes, and all of our, everybody who just continues to help make this conversation happen. Anything else I'm forgetting? Anybody want to say anything?
No, you covered most of everything. I mean, just again, part 3 of the webinar, social media criminalization of the youth. That's going to be a big one. We'll be talking about the use of social media, how NYPD operates their smart units to monitor our kids, and also gang labeling in the schools. So we will be giving you guys information about how the School Safety Division of NYPD is part of this machine. So please look out for that. We're in the middle of planning, and now we should have the date out shortly. Please follow the website to stay updated on all information. I mean, other than that, I think we're good.
Yeah. Also,
I would just add, if you have some free time and you want to help us do some planning or help us do some outreach, we can also use your support in that way. So please reach out to us, let us know. And then finally, in addition to the webinar that's coming up, we've also been having some really good substantive conversations about holding some candidates forums so that we can have these conversations with all of those people who are asking to represent us in the elected body. So stay tuned for that. And again, if you want to be involved with that, I think it's a good idea. We'd love to have you on board.
Definitely, guys. Thank you. Shout out also to the Life for joining. Thank you guys all for taking some time out. Nathalia, Jane, Marie, Angela, Marquis, everybody who helped with the panels. Thanks again. And we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Happy New Year again. When are we supposed to stop saying that? What day?